10th video community of practice meeting. I'm Pankaj Agrawal, founder of Next Software Solutions and working group leader of this community of practice. Um, if anyone is here for the first time, I would like you to introduce yourself. Uh, so Charles, I guess you joined here for the first time.
Well, I work for the Army, United States Army, and I've been involved with some of the other xAPI groups.
Great. So, okay, let's review the last meeting we had on November 3rd. We discussed on few things. The first one was whether we should use stop or does pause inform enough for the use cases. So we discussed whether we should use a separate verb for stop or the pause verb will be enough. We had a decision that we'll not use stop as a separate verb. So we decided to drop this verb called stop in the last meeting. Is there anything we need to discuss further on this? Okay, so the next thing we discussed was the seek verb, and we discussed whether or not we should use seek verb as a separate verb. An alternative was that we can use pause and then a consecutive verb called play to make equal sense of a seek verb. And we decided that we'll use a seek verb, a separate seek verb, when a user moves from one pointer in the video to another pointer on the video. So instead of pausing on the first pointer and starting back with play on the next pointer, we decided that we'll use a separate verb with seek as a verb, and there will be meta information that will tell the time from where he moved and to which point he moved in the video. Next thing we discussed was what should happen when a user.
Pankaj.
Yes.
Are you showing the notes from last time? Because we're seeing the countdown.
I'm not showing the notes. I can
okay.
I can open. Yeah, I can open the list of things we discussed. So yes. So the third thing we discussed was what should happen when a user reaches the end position in a video. Do we need a verb ended to mean the reaching end position in the video, or paused would make equal sense? The decision was that we don't need an ended verb, and paused would be of equal meaning because we can add the timestamp of time in the video where the user paused, and if it matches the length of the video, it will mean the end of the video. So we decided to remove ended as a verb. Then the fourth thing we discussed was the idea of progress, and the progress would mean the actual percent of video consumed. So if a user jumps over in a video, that part would not be counted, and only the part of the video he has actually gone through would be counted, and that would be calculated, and progress information would be calculated, the percentage of video actually consumed. And we decided that we'll use the result part of the xAPI statement, result scaled. So the result scale would give the progress information, and it would be passed in the paused verb, on the seek verb, and on the completed verb. So these three verbs would be the verbs which would actually change the progress of the user. And so this might make more sense to add the percentage, uh, the real progress of the user. So this will also contain these verbs will also have a heat map, which will show from which point user started and where he stopped or paused, and then where he started and then where he paused. So the entire heat map in a string like this. I'll add here something like this. String would tell what how the user progressed through the video, and it will help create a heat map if someone wants. Let's see. Yeah, so if some reporting tool wants to create a heat map of how user watched a video, they would be able to create this kind of heat map in their reports or wherever required. So this string will be able to be converted by a reporting tool into a heat map like this. Next thing we discussed was the idea of progress metadata. So yes, this is the same thing. Um, and then we discussed if we should have progressed. I think I'm not listed there, but yes, we discussed the idea of progress as a verb to denote key intermediate milestones like 25% of video completed, 50% completed, and 75% completed, something like this. So we decided that we will not use progress as a separate verb for denoting these key milestones. If some if the LRS or the LMS or some reporting tool wants to add this information, they could do on their own by their own methods. So we will not specify any progress verb as to specify different milestones. So this was the overall thing we discussed, and apart from this, we also discussed a bit on the meta information we will have. The key thing we discussed was the audio language, and we decided that the language is generally not available with most of the videos. So or there might be multiple tracks with the same language, so we would also need to track information. So we separated out this information as one meta information that talks about language and tells the language, and then another metadata which will be the track name. So it will tell the audio track name that is listened by the user. So this is the overall review of the last meeting we had. So now we have a very strong list of verb, I would say. This will be almost what we have. The session start will be with an initialized verb. Whenever a user clicks on play, it will be played. Video pause will be the paused verb. Seek is seeked. If a user modifies any setting on the video player or mutes, unmutes, changes the video size or caption or any interaction with the video player apart from play, pause, and seek would be captured by this interacted verb. end of the session, after which nothing is recorded, will be the terminated verb. And when the user consumes the entire video, it will be denoted by the completed verb. So completed verb will be sent to the LRS when a user has actually consumed 100% of the video. We might need to add another verb called abandoned. If we want to follow what CMI 5 is doing regarding termination and abruptly ending the session without the video itself sending a terminated statement. So we could add this abandoned verb in the scenario where the video is launched by an LMS that can do it. So this will probably be an optional verb.
So I guess the point I would make on that is one, you know, that we visited before, is I think that we have to be careful of scope here. To me, the abandoned verb within the scope of this COP would be if I start a video on a given page and I hit next, go to the next page before that video has ended. So I've abandoned the video. What you're discussing, if I understand you, is abandoned as defined by CMI 5, which would be above and outside the scope of the video itself.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, you are right. So if the video knows when a user has ended the session, for example, if a user goes to another page and the video player is able to get that information somehow. For example, there are events on if you are playing the video on a browser and you hook on to the page unloaded event, you might be able to send a terminated verb for the end of session. So it could be an end of session by moving to another page. So in all those cases, a terminated verb would probably make much more sense. But if in any case terminated is not sent to the LRS for some reason, I guess LMS can decide to send abandoned as a statement. But you are right, we need to decide whether it should be part of the scope of this spec, or I don't know. What do you suggest? Anthony?
Sorry, I had something in another window. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Whenever the video player can itself capture the information that the user has abandoned the page, it can send a terminated verb. So the terminated is when the user has ended the session. But
that's not. I mean, that's not going to be sent by the video player. That's going to be sent by the construct that holds the video player. So, for example, if I go to the LMS and launch a course that has a video, the course is saying the session has ended. The video won't. The video is just an item on a page. The page is what would send that terminated verb or statement, I guess I should say. Like I cannot structurally, and maybe I'm wrong. If someone else can figure out how to do this, that would be awesome. But I can't think of a way that you could launch even xAPI content as, for example, an MP4 document. You would have to have some structure around it.
Yeah, you are right. So whenever I'm saying the video player will send, I'm saying that it could be video player. Actually, if YouTube decides that they'll implement xAPI, they can decide to send statements to the LRS. So the player can do it, but let's say if some other players, I've got names like, for example, JW player is a video player, and JW player decides to implement xAPI, they can do it. But most of the time, or at least today, we would have a script, something like a JavaScript that would hook on to the events that is sent by the player, and that script will be sending these statements. So whenever I'm saying video player will send the statements, I'm actually trying to say that the script sending these statements will be doing it. So yes, you are right that there has to be some wrapper around the video which will be sending these statements.
I guess I'm still looking at that, and I'm very concerned about scope, because again, I think we're confusing scope of the overarching architecture and construct around the video with the video element itself. So I think we're dipping our toe into CMI5 territory here. I'm not sold on that opinion, though. Apparently somebody objects quite vehemently. Sorry.
I would not want to. Yes, your objection is very good, and we would want to solve this issue. And I would not want to enter CMI5 territory, but I would want this spec to be able to work together with a CMI5 environment, as well as outside a CMI5 environment. So
I would agree with that. My concern would be if we extend into that territory, whenever CMI5 updates, we would have to update this documentation as well. Whereas if we just stay out of that territory and leave CMI5 to document themselves, we don't have to do the updates.
Yeah, I agree with that, but we would need to be able to figure out a way that this spec works together with CMI5, because if we write a spec and people cannot use this spec along with a CMI5 environment, we would be leaving a big part of the people using API. So you are right that we would not want to be dependent on CMI5 and want to change every time CMI5 changes. So abundant, I agree that abundant is a
I think abandon is a good verb for us to have, because you will have cases where the video itself is I start the video and then I go away. I don't hit pause. I just leave. So I think it's a good verb. I think we just have to be careful in our definition. But I do think it's an important verb to have.
So what do you suggest? Like, should we have these two verbs or not? And if we define it, how should we define it?
So like I say, I would remove terminated personally. I would keep abandon, and I would define it as you leave. I'm going to say this, but even as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about the mechanics of it, and I don't know that it would necessarily work with every player. But if abandon would be if I disengage the player object, i.e. I go to another page, before I hit pause or stop.
So who sends this this statement?
So I'm thinking that would be the player object. As I'm speaking though, as I'm talking this through, I'm thinking like JW player, for example, I think does have a way to denote abandonment versus I've just closed the player. You know, like some players, when you go to another page, it will issue its own pause statement and then disengage the player or unload the player object. JW player, I think, has a way to discriminate between those two events.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, you know, if I hit play and then I go to another page, I unload the page, JW player knows that is a different event than if I hit pause and then go to the next page. I'm not sure if that's mechanically true of all players.
I think the real target of having terminated or abandoned is to be able to find where the session actually ends. So I was looking at the CMI5 spec and looking at the terminated verb there. It says the AU obligation, AU must record a statement containing terminated verb. This statement must be the last statement of any kind recorded by the AU in a system. So
okay, but we're talking about two different things. I'm talking about the video, you're talking about the session.
yeah, so a video session, whenever a video session ends, we need to find when the session ends. So when we talk in the context of CMI5, and AU could be sending a terminated verb when the session ends. So it could be by going to another page, it could be by closing the page, it could be by clicking on an end button on the player, or whatever that determines that determines that there will not be anything else again on this same session. So when I talk about session, whether in a CMI5 context or in a video context, it is when a player starts to take the video, and the end of the session would be when when the user um, stops the video or ends the video. So ending is in a sense that he cannot start back on the video without reloading or restarting the video with a new launch. So in case of terminated, it says that terminated will be sent by the AU, and then LMS obligation, it says if terminated is not available, a LMS can send an abandoned statement. LMS must record an abandoned statement on behalf of the AU indicating abnormal session termination.
Right, but again, that's at an AU level. I'm talking about at an elemental level.
If there are multiple videos, let's say in a CMI5 context, if there are multiple videos, or if there is multiple elements inside an AU and video is one of those elements, I guess terminated would not be required, because then CMI5 would need to handle that.
Well, again, the terminated would be sent at the AU level, but an AU academic unit, I forget what A stands for now. That could include multiple video elements. So again, there's a difference between the session level or the AU level and the element level. whereas an AU can include multiple elements, and very likely will include multiple elements. So what I was saying before is at the elemental level, if you're in the middle of a video and you leave, you would abandon the video. That's not to say you would abandon the AU. Those are two different things.
Okay, I also had this confusion. So let's first clear what abandoned and what terminated means. I had the confusion that abandoned would be something like what you said, and terminated would be when the user himself decide to end the session. But after looking at these definitions in the CMI5 spec, to me it feels like abandoned is an abnormal termination. It says the verb abandoned indicates that the AU session was abnormally terminated by a learner's action or due to a system failure. So, and terminated would be when the AU itself is able to tell that the session has terminated. So, based on my understanding after reading this, it looks like if the wrapper with the player or the player or the video itself, if it is sending the statements, and if it is able to determine that the session has ended, it should send the terminated verb. And abandoned is done by the LMS only, not by the AU. So if we talk in the content sense or in the context of a video, the video player or video player wrapper sending the statement should not send abandoned. And the LMS itself should determine if the session ended by any mistake or a failure or any other reason. It can add this abandoned verb. So if you
So
change
this,
they might be confusing.
okay, but okay, so this looks like it's actually very poorly written. The way I'm reading this, and again, I haven't, unfortunately, I have a conflict with the Friday calls, or I did have a conflict with the Friday calls for CMI5, so I haven't been able to join those. But from what this is reading, especially that second half, the LMS must record an abandoned statement on behalf of the AU, indicating an abnormal session termination. So, for example, let's say, and again, this is at a session or at an AU level as opposed to an elemental level. If I launch a course and then the phone rings, I get up, I walk away from my computer, and I time out, that would be an abandoned. So at that point, the LMS recognizes that it has stopped receiving statements, and why an LMS is receiving statements, I have no idea. That's the province of an LRS, which may or may not be part of an LMS. So that's kind of where I'm having some issue with how this is written. But the LMS would then interpret the lack of activity as a timeout and would say, okay, this person has abandoned this session, I'm going to start it over. Well, or no, I'm going to he's abandoned it, so I will terminate it, so any future activity would be under another session. That's basically how SCORM works now.
Okay. There could be another thing that the AU itself decides that the session has timed out, and AU sends a terminated statement and stops ends the session there.
And that's true also. If the AU has a timer on it that says, hey, you haven't had any keyboard input for a while, the AU could then make the choice of sending the terminated, okay, we're going to complete, or the abandoned, denoting an abnormal exit. That's at the discretion of the AU.
Yeah, but looking at what CMI5 has explained here, AU is not going to send the abandoned verb. So if AU is telling the session has ended, it has to call it terminated. And if LMS is calling the session has ended, it has to call it abandoned. That is what I get the feeling out of this explanation of these two verbs.
Well, the problem is the two statements say two different things. One is the LMS must use the statement, and the other is the LMS must record the statement.
Yeah. So when
Those
LMS
are not necessarily congruent statements.
Yeah, when I read this, it's what I get. What understanding I get is that LMS must use the terminated statement to determine. So it is using the terminated statement sent by the AU. So LMS is able to read and understand that terminated statement means that the session has ended. But if terminated statement is not available, LMS has to send an abandoned statement if it has enough reasons to believe that the session is not continuing. So whenever the onus of sending a terminated verb is on the AU, and for the same thing, if the LMS is sending it, it has to send the abandoned verb. So both verbs are kind of meaning the same thing, that the session has ended. But if AU sends, it is terminated. If LMS sends, it is abandoned.
Yeah, I see where you're at. So yeah, so in my scenario, if the user walks away and the AU detects that, it would send a terminated. It wouldn't send abandoned. That makes sense. But again, that's all at the AU level. That's my stance would be that's above and beyond the element level that is the province of the COP.
No,
I mean, let me rephrase this. Unless someone can show me an example of an MP4 being an AU into and of itself, I am going to maintain that that is above the charter of the COP.
Yeah, we had a lot of this discussion with the CMI5 group, and there are multiple ways in which video can work. So one of the ways that video can be an independent thing without the CMI5. But in the context of CMI5, there can be two different things. One is when the video itself is the AU. So video with the wrapper around it, which sends the statement, will act as an AU itself. And another thing, yeah.
I will disagree with that, and I will stand on fairly good ground on that, using SCORM and xAPI both as examples. At that point, the wrapper, the MP4 in that point is an element on a page that houses the wrapper. So the page is the AU, not the MP4 file itself. The other thing I will bring up also is I think we're also starting to tread on CMI5 versus xAPI. And I think that is a very big difference, because not everything that's xAPI compliant is CMI5 compliant, nor should it be.
Yeah.
So again, I think we need to leave the province of CMI5 to CMI5, and we should focus on the element level. I think the AU and session level should be left to the CMI5 group or to whatever other group. Because just for example, I work with Internet of Things. CMI5 has little to no interest to me, because we're never going to be at that point, or very far away from that point, because we're dealing with things that are conceptually very different. So CMI5 is not necessarily something that we're going to concern ourselves with, at least in the foreseeable future. But we may still have media concerns even on IoT devices.
Yeah. Yeah. So video, do you think that video will be an important component of a CMI5 AU?
Do I think video will be important to CMI5? No, I don't. Because I think CMI5 is at the session level or the AU level, not at the element level.
No, but do you think videos will be there in a CMI5, inside CMI5 content?
I do, yes.
And do you think whatever we write as a spec in this COP, it should apply to those videos inside the CMI5 content?
I think it should apply to the video inside the CMI5 content, not the CMI5 level itself.
Yeah, so the thing is that we had a lot of discussion about this, and there was a major conflict uh, with a CMI5, with CMI5 and any component inside CMI5. Initially, they said that anything inside CMI5 cannot send uh, the AU, or anything inside it cannot send multiple past or completed work. So, if there are multiple video component inside CMI5, it would not comply to CMI5 if both videos were sending a completed work. So,
but I don't agree. I have problems with that, and again, I'm unable to join the CMI5, so maybe I just need to talk to Jason directly.
So
because
I had
when
to
I
talk
said
with them,
I'm
and
not,
I had to fight out with this thing, and then they had to change it.
because
So
I'm not. You don't just say I completed. You say I completed this, and then
yeah,
under the CMI5 rules, the this is the CMI5 object or the course. At the elemental level, what I complete is this video, which is a completely discrete object. It's a completely different object. So there's no excuse for that conflicting with the CMI5 level statements.
yeah. So we had all this discussion. Whatever you were saying, I told it to them, and there were other people on those calls, and finally we decided that yes, this can work. So what I'm trying to say is, uh, though it might seem that we don't need to worry anything about the elemental level, uh, we generally need to at least make sure that it works with the spec that CMI5 is developing. Now, talking about video, yeah, go ahead.
But making sure that it works alongside CMI5 and listing CMI5 verbs and objects, I think, are two different things.
Mhm.
See, that's why I say, again, I don't think we should be listing CMI5 verbs or terminology, because again, if CMI5 changes, then we have to change. If we don't use if we only concern ourselves at the element level, which is quite frankly where video, like I said, until somebody can show me an AU that is nothing more than an MP4, no JavaScript, no HTTP or HTML, I'm going to stand on this that that video is purely an element within an AU and won't exist at the CMI5 level. So I think we should just completely, leave that out. I think we have less chance of conflict doing that than we do if we include those terms.
The thing is that there are several terms on CMI5 list that we would need to use. For example, let's see what we have. For example, the initialized. Initialized will be the start of the video in our case. And initialized verb is there in the CMI5 as well. That is the start of the AU session. So if you say we should drop initialized verb from our list, we cannot do it because we need to know when the video started.
So there for event, because session is, as far as I'm aware, session is industry regarded as the learning session, not the element session. So initialize there, the event would be the player object is loaded.
Yeah. So
and maybe that's where we're tripping over each other, is the use of the word session, because from my experience, session refers to the time in which you are in the AU or in the course, not the time in which you are in any given element.
the way we thought, or the way we discussed earlier was that if, let's say, a CMI5 AU has nothing but a video. Now, in that case, the first verb will be initialized, and the activity ID of the video will be the same as the AU activity ID. So, in a sense, it will be the AU will be the video.
No.
Hey guys. Hey guys. This is Jason. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry for joining you a few minutes late.
Yeah.
Maybe I can help add some context here. So I think you can use initialized. Actually, if you look at the formal definition that we have on the ADL site, if you go to adlnet.gov/xAPI API verbs, we did update the definition a while back to be more generalized, so it's not specific to course tracking, session tracking, or anything like that. The description that CMI5 is using is specific to their particular kind of profile, and we've got some vocabulary guidance that's coming out that allow you to use existing terms without changing the original meaning and maybe adding your own intended scope note to it. I think you can use initialized right now if you want to. It's totally fine. It's not specific to SCORM or AICC courses.
But
you could also use started if you wanted to. I mean, and just provide
I think, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. Go ahead. I think there's a delay on my end, Anthony.
That's right. So my stance would be, though, in the session, or in the example that Pankaj laid out, where I have an AU that is a web page that has a video and nothing else. That's all it is. I would first start or initialize the session, then I would start or initialize the video.
Oh, yeah, great. Definitely. If it's, I'm sorry, I didn't know the context. If it's embedded in a, another page, I agree. You might need another verb before that, depending on what kind of granularity you want to track. You're talking about initializing the session versus starting the actual video.
Right. And my stance would be, and Jason, you have more experience, so maybe you're aware of this, until someone can show me an example where I load an MP4 without any HTML architecture around it, so no JW player, nothing, I'm just the MP4, then until somebody can show me that working and sending xAPI, then the MP4 requires the HTML. The HTML page may be the session, and the MP4 is an element within that session. And I think that's where Pankaj and I are getting, are bumping up against each other, is the use of the word session here.
Yeah.
Because I see these as two distinct levels. One is within the other.
Yeah, I agree that it could definitely be two distinct levels. And historically, the word initialize, the verb initialize, was carried over from SCORM. When we first started with xAPI, we wanted to at least support that SCORM use case. And it was talking about initializing the session between the SCORM content and the LMS. That was the initial kind of definition. We've since then tried to generalize it some more so it could be used more broadly if people wanted to, and it's not really specific to just courses. So yeah, I totally agree.
The other thing, since you're here now, I will say that I also see it as kind of a CMI5 versus xAPI argument, but we won't get into that right now.
True. And if you wanted to really make these, this video vocabulary profile distinct, I mean, you could use other verbs. It's not, it's kind of been ingrained in everyone's head that we need to keep reusing the old ADL ones and this, the activity streams ones. But, I think we're about to be on the onset of providing more semantic power, leveraging semantic web. There's going to be really no harm in using different verbs if they really meet your needs and are more applicable to what you're trying to describe, in the use case you're trying to describe. Trying to force everyone to use terms that have been around and used in other contexts, such as the SCORM ones, is kind of limiting. And I think everyone just kind of, forced that for years because we were in the very early stages and we were afraid of everything just becoming too rampant and widespread and out of control.
I wanted
There's no
to
harm
use,
in there's no harm in using something other than initialized here if you really want to. There really isn't.
if other COPs are using the same verb for the same meaning, I wanted to use the same verb because if there are multiple different verbs, for example, currently most of the xAPI content created by these authoring tools like Articulate and Captivate and other authoring tools, for the start they send attempted verb. So attempted is a verb that denotes the start of the session or whatever you say, the start of the content. Now, CMI 5 calls for initialized to denote start of the content. When there are multiple different verbs meaning the same thing, it becomes a little complicated for the reporting tools to generate reports out of it without making changes. So if a reporting tool is already able to find out the session or the content started with the initialized verb, it would not need extra changes if there is a video with the initialized verb calling the start of the video. It would already be compatible to some of the reporting when we use the same verb.
Yeah, and that fits into the update to the descriptions of the ADL verbs. Some, if you read the attempted one, it kind of falls well with that as well. Because initialized, did seem to be too specific to, session tracking activity with courses or whatever in the past. Attempted, the definition is indicates the actor made an effort to access the object in a statement without additional activities could be considered incomplete in some cases. So it doesn't say anything other than, they attempted it.
Yeah, but the way it is being used currently by the content generated by most of the authoring tools, it is to denote that they started the content. So the first statement sent by the content is the attempted verb.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, try to fit everything based on the way some authoring tools did some things necessarily. I mean, that's going to change with the wind. I really would urge you to do what makes sense to your specific use case, or what you guys feel together as a group makes most sense. Because I've seen some authoring tools also give people the ability to create verbs on the fly, which is totally a bad practice. I won't say which tools are doing that, but
Yeah.
Could you be kind enough to email me which tools are doing that?
yeah, yeah, I won't say on the call.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I'm fine with initialized, but that's because I've been part of this conversation for a while and I understand the context and why we're using it and everything. To Jason's point, if you're a newbie just coming to this, that on one hand, I'm going to say that might be confusing. On the other hand, I don't know another word that would be better, if I'm honest. Mm-hmm. And that could just be my own lack of creativity.
I'm not in support of changing the verb because I understand that it creates a lot of complication in reporting. So, and again, the meaning of the start is same. Like you started the video, that is the meaning we are talking about. So if initialize is being used by CMI5 and others, I think some other COPs are also using the same verb initialized for start of the session or the start of the content. So I don't see any reason why we should change the verb. For the sake of changing, we can change it, but I don't see any reason why we should change it.
I would agree. I'm not compelled to change it. Like I said, it makes sense to me, but I may be too close to it, and I can't think of another word that wouldn't be equally, if not more, confusing.
Yeah, sorry, I just jumped. I know I jumped in late. It just sounded like you guys were stuck on whether you wanted to use it because you were on that CMI5 page and they had a specific use of it. But I think it's fine to use initialize if you want to. It's general. It's general enough. It meets, just about any use case.
No, it's a valid point. It is, and similarly, the same point could be made with terminated at item 6, where the vocabulary that I think we're having a little trouble with right now is the use of the word session. So like I said, so for item 1, this initialized within the context or the scope of the video COP would not be the session started. That would be the video is loaded or the video played. Whatever.
Yeah. Video object started or video activity started. Yeah, you don't have to say session.
Or you know what? Or maybe that's the word activity started, activity ended, as opposed to session.
Yeah, session it might be confusing. I agree.
Okay. So I guess we need to understand a little more about session and see what session exactly means.
I mean, a lot of it carries over from SCORM, like I was saying earlier, because it's a temporal state-based model. And when you started a session, they had the concept of different attempts on a SCO. You could have multiple attempts. You could limit the attempts and do all those things. And so all that was related to the temporal model. There's the concept of that model is still applicable if you're doing like a SCORM type of, xAPI content, SCORM profile of xAPI content, maybe even CMI5, but I wouldn't say that using, session in terms of a video profile is applicable. So I would probably eliminate it just to avoid confusion.
Okay, so I think the key thing that we need to decide is what Anthony and I were discussing, and probably we were having kind of a conflict, is whether a video activity or what a video session should always be an element inside CMI5, or it can be the AU itself. When I say that, let's say if the video is the entire thing inside CMI5 content, should there be another initialize statement sent after the initialization of the AU itself? If the video is element inside a CMI5 content, CMI5 AU will send its own initialized statement as the CMI5 session starts, and then the element has to send its own statements, whatever it is, initialized or attempted or whatever. So should the video always be an element inside a CMI5 content, or
I would hope
in,
not.
Wait, say that again. Pankaj, could you say that again?
I mean, in a CMI5 context, if the video is inside a CMI5 context, should it always be an element inside CMI5, or it can be the AU level? So that is what we need to decide. Like you said that it always should be an element level. So I'm trying to understand what Jason thinks.
So I'll back up a little. I will, like I said, until someone can show me MP4 files sending an xAPI statement itself without HTML around it, any media, MP4, MP3, whatever, that will be an element. If it's within the context of CMI5 of a CMI5 course, then it's an element within a CMI5 course or CMI5 AU. But again, not xAPI will be CMI5 compliant, and I think we would do ourselves a disservice to only deal within the scope of CMI5.
Yeah, I agree with that. It should be modular or be able to stand alone.
And again, just to give you an example of, like I said, I've been working with Internet of Things lately, and if you think about, for example, an iPod, I might send xAPI statements every time a song plays, but I can tell you right now, I'm not going to bother with being CMI5 compliant in that case.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to be always CMI5 bound. So I would not want to be bound by CMI5 that whenever a video plays, it should be part of CMI5. So video can always be an independent thing. It could be without an LMS, it could be without a browser, it could be in an app, or it could be anywhere else. So I would not want video to be bound on the CMI5 context itself. So one scenario is where video is outside a CMI5 context. It can be in an app, in your iPhone or iPad. So where there is probably no HTML at all. There might be some other coding, Objective-C or something else going on there. Now, in that case, CMI5 context is not prevalent, but our spec should work in that context. I agree totally with that. But if the video is inside a CMI5 context, we need to understand how it should work and if it complies with the CMI5 spec or not. My objective is that our spec should be able to be a part of the CMI5 where a video is inside CMI5. It should be able to send the statements we want it to send, and it should not conflict with what CMI5 wants it to do. So that is the entire thing I want to be sure about. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yeah, I'm trying to translate that into. I get, like I said, I'll answer it this way, the way I did before. I agree with you that nothing we do should conflict with CMI5 or xAPI best practice or any other COP as much as possible. Obviously, we can't guarantee we never conflict, but I think that's very different than having any of the CMI5 information in the in the COP documentation, which I'm fervently against.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you. We should be able to operate within CMI5 rules and regulations and not conflict, but I don't think we should be including any of that in this documentation.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So what I'm trying to do is to have a spec that can work with CMI5 in whatever ways CMI5 can handle. And one of that was that video can be a part of the CMI5 AU along with other activities inside the same AU. So that there was a conflict there and that is handled. Now, a video can be an element inside an AU along with another element. So that is one thing that that I can say is handled, and we need to reconfirm that once we are finalizing all these extra metadata we are sending along with the verbs. So when we send initialized or terminated verb, we are not conflicting with CMI5, even if it is inside as an element or it is the AU itself. So if the video is the AU itself in a CMI5 context, the first verb can be the initialized verb and the last verb can be the terminated verb, and it would have the video activity ID will be the same as the AU activity ID in that case. If the video is an element inside the AU, it'll have a different activity ID from the AU's activity ID, and it will have a parent ID that is same as the AU's activity ID. So the video activity will have a parent activity which will be the AU, CMI5 AU. Do you see anywhere we would be conflicting?
This is Jason. I don't see that you'd be conflicting necessarily. I mean, like you said, the object ID would, for the video would be different than it would be for the AUs. So you're talking about initializing an assignable unit, or AU as it's called in CMI5, versus initializing a video. So you could have the same verb used or applied to different activities, different objects. I don't think there would be any kind of conflict in terms of collision. I mean, their general use of initialized may have a little bit of a different meaning, and that's just inherently a problem we kind of have from not providing enough meaning to these verbs earlier on, and everyone's kind of using the same ones. But I mean, I don't at the core level, I don't see any kind of like real conflict in anything breaking. Are you guys worried about something breaking from like a reporting standpoint, or what is the real concern there?
One of the concern is that whatever we do should not be restricted by the CMI5 spec.
Okay, I see right there because they're saying, initialize is specifically using an AU. But that's kind of more of a, a scope note. I mean, the
Yeah. So
ID, the actual meaning of that verb initialized is a broader use than what they're using it for. But I see your concern there just in terms of semantics.
no, I'm not worried about this description. I'm sure it will work with when I read AU obligation, it says AU must
Oh,
use
okay.
initialized in the first statement of any kind in the AU session. So in the
I
context
see.
of video, it will be the first statement of any kind in the video session.
Oh, okay, I see. Okay, I see. You're talking more conformance and what they've put in here in terms of their requirements.
So
I
this
see.
is
Okay.
this is not an issue. There could be some other issues like session handling or what should be part of a CMI5 statement and what should not.
I mean, this might be. Do you call into the CMI5 meetings?
Sometimes not.
I plan on calling in this Friday one. This might be something that they should not necessarily put as a requirement here because I wonder if it could break lots of other types of content that could be embedded that may use initialized.
Yeah, so earlier there was a restriction that all these verbs cannot be used inside a CMI5 context. So that restriction is removed now. We can use these verbs with a different activity ID. So that should not be a problem. We can use these verbs inside a CMI5
Okay.
context.
So these obligations, AU obligations in here are kind of outdated in terms of
AU
what.
No, this is not outdated. The thing is that earlier it said that there should be only one initialized statement inside in a CMI5 session. So if a CMI5 session is there, there should be only one initialized statement, only one completed statement. But if there are multiple component inside a CMI5 AU, they will be sending initialized and completed and passed and failed statements. So there will be
Mhm.
multiple passed and failed statements which can be there in one CMI5 session. So there was
But
this
that,
issue earlier, but it is solved now. So uh, we can send passed and completed and all these verbs as a component.
But initialized is not allowed. That's your main concern.
No, initialized is also allowed. So currently I don't have any concern, but I'm just asking if you see any concern or any issues that can happen if the video is at the AU level and AU and video activity ID is same.
I'm going to call into the CMI5 meeting this Friday. If you want, I'll try to bring it up and see if it's going to cause a problem.
At the moment,
I
I
don't
don't.
think I don't think it would either. I think they're really just trying to, it's kind of like SCORM content and AU, SCORM SCOs and CMI5 AUs had this requirement so that you didn't have multiple lessons or SCOs or AUs being launched simultaneously in terms of runtime tracking that caused a problem. And it's kind of where this requirement has come from. Maybe that's just for CMI5. If a statement was sent from a video content embedded inside of an AU, I mean, it's going to send a statement with initialize, so that does seem like that would present a conflict. Now,
no,
no.
I don't think so, because it's not being sent within the AU context. When you send that statement, it's going to be I initialized this. So the first one would be I initialized the AU, and the next one's going to be I initialized the video. So from a reporting standpoint and from a recording standpoint, because the object has changed, the context would be different in both cases. So the AU is still only sending one initialize. The other initialize is coming from a completely different context or a different scope.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would read this as there's no conflict at all.
Yeah.
And, I don't know that there would be a way to really see that the AU sent more than one. I guess that would have to go kind of conformance test. But, okay.
Well, that would presuppose the LRS knows the content of each AU to know that this object is a sub-part or an element of that AU, and this is in violation, and that's actually, I think, strictly not required by the xAPI spec. So I can't imagine CMI5 would put that into the requirements on an LRS.
Okay.
If you have a parent ID, it can tell that the video is part of the AU, but I don't see why CMI5 would restrict everything else. There was a restriction, and that was already discussed in CMI5 meetings, and we have been able to get that restriction out of it.
So yeah, so here again, that would require the LRS to take action on extension data, which I don't think, again, I don't think that requirement is in the xAPI spec. So I don't know that the CMI5 would have put that mechanical requirement in.
Yeah, it's not in the spec.
So actually, so as I'm reading through this, it would look to me that if you wanted to even say, this is, okay, the AU is going to launch this session ID, that's in the extensions, and I'm going to launch this video under that session so I can look at, okay, everything that happened within that session. I could still have that session ID in the extensions for the video statement, and that would still not conflict.
Yeah, it should not conflict.
If I'm reading this right anyway.
Yeah, we'll need to read the CMI5 spec again or discuss it in their meeting to be sure that we can add the same session ID to the elements inside a CMI5 AU. I think there was some discussion about something that cannot be added.
And gentlemen, I'm going to have to jump. I got to go pick up my dog. Jason, when are the CMI5 calls? I couldn't make them before because I had a conflict.
Hold on a second. I'll put it in the chat window. Let's see. I'll put it in the chat window right now. You got to register through GoToMeeting. They're Fridays at, I believe, 10:30 Eastern. I'll try that link in the chat window. Yeah, 10:30 Eastern, Fridays, each Friday.
I might be able to join now. I can cause trouble there too.
Well, it's a good, really good topic, and I wonder if they've already, talked through this, and that's why they have some of the things in there that they do, using extensions. It'd be good to see if they've even thought about this. But yeah, I'm gonna sign off too. But thanks, guys. Sorry for joining late, and I'll try to join your next one. Again, I was out last month, of course, and this month I just had a conflict, but thanks.
Okay, no problem. So I think we can end this meeting today, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.